The member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister and every member of his government voted against a Banking Royal Commission 26 times. Having delayed the Royal Commission, the government should not delay Parliament implementing its recommendations. Given that the Parliament is only scheduled to sit for 10 days in 8 months, why won't the Prime Minister schedule extra sittings of the Parliament to implement the recommendations of the Royal Commission?
The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, the member for McMahon hasn't even provided his response to the Royal Commission, and he wants extra sitting week. Oh, he says we have an in-principle agreement. An in-principle agreement. What is your message to the 17,000 mortgage brokers employing 26,000 people across the country, Mr Speaker? What is your message on once-only default, Mr Speaker? What is your message on once-only default? Does the member for McMahon agree with the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia, who said of our approach on mortgage brokers, "I think the government is right to be cautious about going the full way and making the borrower pay"? Mr Speaker, that's what the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia, ME Bank, Mr Speaker, owned by industry funds, has said about that recommendation. I do not think it's about making the consumer pay, Mr Speaker. And when we talk about extra sitting weeks, none other than the Law Council of Australia said Parliament must hasten slowly. We must take time to get this right. We must ensure a real opportunity to set this right through meaningful reform is not lost in the race to the election, Mr Speaker. That's the Law Council of Australia, sending the Labor Party a message about their stunts, Mr Speaker. Now, we have already taken action, Mr Speaker. We've announced the APRA capability review, Mr Speaker. The minister is talking to the states about putting in place a national farm debt mediation scheme, Mr Speaker. The member for Bradfield, is working in order to ensure that financial counselling, there's a proper review to avoid the ad hoc approach, Mr Speaker, that is currently underway. We have said we're going further than the Royal Commission when it comes to extending the jurisdiction of the Federal Court of Australia to hear criminal cases in relation to white-collar crime, Mr Speaker. We've said we're going even further than the Royal Commission when it comes to AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, extending their jurisdiction and remit not back 6 years but back 10 years to hear cases consistent with the period that was examined by the Royal Commission. And we are setting up a scheme of last resort, and I pay tribute to the member for Higgins for the work that she undertook in that respect. And I pay tribute to the now Prime Minister, who as Treasurer put in place the Banking Executive Accountability Regime, which was endorsed by the Royal Commissioner and said not only should it apply to banks, but it also should apply to insurance companies and superannuation funds. Mr Speaker, we are taking action on many fronts. Indeed, we have legislation before this Parliament to implement 2 recommendations of the Hayne Royal Commission with respect to insure super funds and bringing penalties to trustees and directors, Mr Speaker. We are taking action. The Labor Party can't even be bothered with a response.
The Treasurer's time has concluded.